We know since Akbar's time, Rajput princesses were married after Mughals, but we hardly know anything about how their life looked after marriage. What were the rituals done during the marriage ceremony? Did they manage to balance their traditions, or were they forced to convert after marriage? And were they equally treated by the Mughals in the palace? Let's find out today, and don't come to a conclusion before watching the end. After a point of time, Akbar realized that it was not wise and politically smart to constantly fight against the Rajputs. He understood that if he included them and made them supporters instead of enemies, he could establish a great empire in Hindustan. That's why he introduced a Mansabdari system. By this system, the Rajput rulers were allowed to govern their internal affairs independently, while the outside threats will be taken care by Akbar. And each Rajput prince will be given a military rank which determined their status, power, prestige and capabilities within the empire, and these Mansabdaris would receive a monthly income, part of which they would spend on their personal expenses, while the other part will be spent on maintaining a certain number of horses for their military rank. But there was a catch. Apart from all this, a Rajput prince also had to show respect to the emperor, recognize his authority, and pay a yearly tribute to the emperor as a sign of his loyalty. But the important thing to notice here is the alliance between the Rajput Mansabdars and the Mughals didn't require the marriage of Rajput women to the emperor. The idea of the Bridal Alliance, where the emperor would marry a Rajput princess, was not a condition. However, some historians like Colonel James Todd says the Rajputs were forced to marry off their daughters, but there is actually no evidence or historical records to conclude that the marriage of Rajput princesses were forced by Akbar. Abul Fasal, a historian from Akbar's court, gave some detailed accounts of Akbar's marriage to the daughter of Raja Birmal of Amir, who was the first Rajput princess to marry into the Mughal family. And according to Abul Fasal, it was Raja Birmal who initiated the marriage alliance, and Akbar agreed to it. No, her name was not Jodha, and we don't have any records of them being madly in love with each other like it was portrayed in the movie Jodha Akbar. In fact, the daughter of Raja Birmal, the first Rajput princess Akbar married, was the third wife of Akbar. Even after her, we have records of Akbar marrying two other Rajput princesses. Abul Fasal, the historian from Akbar's court, writes, His Majesty forms matrimonial alliances with the princesses of Hindustan and of other countries and secures by these ties of harmony the peace of the world. He also mentioned that the intention behind the matrimonial relationship with Rajputs was to strengthen the empire, and the Mughals hugely got benefited from this. But the reason behind why Rajputs were okay to marry off their daughter to the Mughals is not fully explained. And the most important thing to notice here is the marriages were predominantly one-sided. We have no records of any Mughal princess marrying Rajput men. Only Rajput women were married off to Mughal. If we have to see how the marriage happened, there's hardly any records of the rituals and customs followed in the marriage ceremony. And if we particularly see the marriage of Akbar with the Rajput princesses, each time the historians of Akbar's court simply state that the particular Rajput princess was admitted into the Mughal harem without elaborating further on the marriage ceremony. When Akbar married the niece of Raja Kalyanmal of Biganer, Akbar's historian Badani simply said she was admitted into the imperial harem. In another instance, when Akbar married the princess of Jaisalmer, he did not even personally go there. Instead, he sent Raja Bhagwandas to bring the lady to the palace. In this case also, it is simply mentioned that she obtained eternal glory upon entering the female harem. But let's not forget that Prince Salim, the son of Akbar, who later became Jahangir the emperor, also married Rajput princesses, and we can see totally a different pattern in Jahangir's marriages. He married Manbai, the Rajput princess of Amir, who also happened to be the niece of his mother. Abul Fasal described the marriage that there were grand feasts and gatherings where Akbar and all important figures were all present. Nizamuddin, another historian, provided some additional details confirming that the marriage took place in the palace and was witnessed by Qazis, who are the Islamic judicial officers. But we are certainly not sure whether the marriage was conducted by Qazis according to Islamic law. And here comes the important aspect. Badani, Akbar's court historian, mentioned the following: the emperor celebrated the marriage ceremony in the presence of Qazis and nobles. A settlement of 2 crores of tankas, which was a type of currency, was agreed upon the marriage. They also performed Hindu customs such as lighting the sacred fire. And this indicates that the marriage was conducted according to the Hindu rituals, and dowry system was there between them. Then Jahangir married the princess of Jodhpur, and her name was Jodhabai. So Jodha was not Akbar's wife, but in fact Akbar's daughter-in-law. And when it comes to the after marriage life of these Rajput women who married the Mughals, we have have very limited information. There are only few scattered references and casual mentions of how these women lived within the palace. In some miniature paintings of harem scenes, the ladies are depicted wearing bindi and bangles, which are traditional Hindu feminine identities, and their clothing was also like typical Rajasthani style. Badani mentions that from a young age, Akbar, in honor of his wives who were the daughters of the Rajas of Hind, he continued to perform the home ceremony, the fire ritual, within the female residence of the harem. So we can clearly see that the Rajput princesses were not converted after marriage and were allowed to follow their own religious customs. This claim is also supported by few architectural features. The Bengali Mahal of Agra fort had a complete temple dedicated to Lord Kartikeya. So we can clearly say the Rajput women were allowed to follow the Hindu way of life as long as they didn't go against the general norms of the harem. Finally, how were they cremated? In the Hindu way or Muslim way? The princess of Amir, the first Rajput woman Akbar married, was also the mother of Jahangir, was widely mentioned as Hazrat Maryam uz-Zamani in Mughal records. She lived a long life and passed away in 1623. Jahangir wrote a note in memory of her mother that the news came from Agra that she had passed away. He expressed his hope that God would shower his mercy upon her. Other than this, we have no additional information about her cremation. Then she was buried in Sikandra and a tomb was built for her. People say that she was buried close to Akbar, but that close is a distance of 1 kilometer. Then when Jodhabai passed away, who was the mother of Shah Jahan, Jahangir wrote in a casual manner that he personally visited Shah Jahan's place to console him, and the following day he brought him to the palace. Then on the Sunday following her death, they both entered the city in a joyous procession, but he did not mention anything about how Jodhabai's body was handled or cremated. However, Jahangir seemed to have genuinely mourned the death of Manbai. She was the first Rajput woman to die after marrying Mughals. She killed herself by consuming poison because apparently she was disappointed with her son's actions against Jahangir, and she died when Jahangir was away on a hunting trip. Jahangir expressed his deep admiration for Manbai's intelligence and her devotion to him. He recounted her constant efforts to guide their son and her ultimate decision to choose death out of frustration and Rajput pride. And as a sign of mourning, Jahangir did not eat or drink anything for several days. From this account, we can see what kind of special place Manbai had in the heart of Jahangir. One thing to note here, Manbai died when Jahangir was a prince. So we can say that Jahangir was more compassionate towards his wives when he was a prince compared to when he became an emperor. The tomb of Manbai, who was widely mentioned as Shah Begum, can be found in Allahabad, which was the headquarters of Jahangir when he was a prince. So to some extent, we can come to a conclusion that the Rajput women who married into the Mughal family were buried in the Muslim way. But there is a catch here. None of these women were buried in the same tomb with her husband. Why? Were they not married to their husbands in a proper manner, or is it just because they were not fully practicing Muslim women? The question of whether they were cremated according to Hindu customs or whether buried according to Muslim law still remains unanswered. Maybe to really get an answer to this question, one can only open the grave to see if they have skeletal remains or only ashes. In the end, we all know for sure that the Rajput women who married into the Mughal family led a fascinating life. They somehow managed to balance their Rajput traditions with the demands of their Mughal husbands and became influential figures in politics and diplomacy.